Welcome back to the deep dive. I was looking at some old biology textbooks the other day.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
stuff from the 70s mostly. And it really struck me how we tend to treat taxonomy like it's this dusty, finished architecture.
Right. Like the work is already done.
Exactly. We act like the Tree of Life is a static museum exhibit. Like
Yeah.
everything has a label, a shelf, and, a permanent address.
Which is a very comforting fiction, but completely wrong.
Yeah.
If you work in the field, you know taxonomy is actually more like an active construction site. There is scaffolding everywhere, walls are being knocked down.
Tenants being evicted.
Yeah, evicted and moved to new buildings on a weekly basis, basically.
Especially in the neotropics. And today, we're going to look at one specific tenant that has been living through, honestly, a massive renovation project.
A total identity crisis.
A complete identity crisis. We are talking about a frog that has bounced around the scientific filing cabinet for nearly 50 years before finally, just recently, getting its own name on the door.
And not just a new species name either, a whole new genus.
Right.
We are diving into the story of Bahius, which, it sounds grand, doesn't it?
It does. Bahius. It sounds like a Roman emperor or something.
It really does. But the irony is that this grand emperor currently has no subjects. It is what we call a monotypic genus.
Meaning it's a club of one.
Exactly one. There is only a single species in the entire genus, Bahius bilineatus.
Just one. And, that solitude is exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Because when you have a single species representing an entire evolutionary branch, the stakes for understanding it change.
And for saving it, too.
Oh, dramatically.
So here's the mission for our deep dives today. We aren't just talking about a frog. We are talking about how we categorize life on Earth. We're going to explore this frog's chaotic history of names, its incredibly unique survival skills in human-altered landscapes, and why this specific two-lined robber frog is the absolute sole member of its genus.
It's going to be a fascinating journey.
It is. And just to give you a roadmap of where we are pulling this from, we'll be drawing heavily on recent taxonomic records and studies, along with conservation data from the IUCN Red List.
Which paints a really interesting, slightly contradictory picture, as we'll see.
Yeah, we will definitely get into that. But let's start with the creature itself. The common name is the two-lined robber frog.
Right.
Which I have to say is just a fantastic name. Robber frog. It sounds so intriguing.
It does sound like a tiny thief. But anyone who follows herpetology knows the term robber frog is a bit of a catch-all.
Right, for the family Krogastoridae and its relatives.
Exactly. It's a classic misnomer. They aren't out there stealing tiny wallets from other amphibians.
Though that would make for an amazing documentary.
It really would. But the robber moniker historically comes from their speed.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, their speed and their elusiveness. Early naturalists found them incredibly frustrating to catch. The frogs would basically rob the collector of their prize by just vanishing into the leaf litter.
That makes total sense. They rob you of the catch.
Exactly.
And the two-line part, the bilineatus, that's pretty self-explanatory, right?
Yeah, you look at the dorsal side, the back of the frog, and you see the pattern. It has these two distinct lines.
Okay, so the common name makes sense, but the scientific name, that is where the headache really begins.
A massive headache.
Because if we were having this conversation, say, 5 years ago, we wouldn't even be saying the word Bahius.
No, not at all. We would be talking about Eleutherodactylus bilineatus.
Ah, the dreaded Eleutherodactylus.
The ultimate wastebasket of the neotropics.
It really is. I feel like every time we look at the history of a South American frog, it inevitably starts in Eleutherodactylus.
It's so true.
It seems like for the better part of the 20th century, if a scientist found a small frog that developed directly without a tadpole stage, and it didn't have webbed feet, they just tossed it in there.
They tossed it in and called it a day. That is essentially exactly what happened.
Wow.
But you have to remember the historical context here. When Bokerman first described this frog back in 1975, he was working primarily with morphology.
Physical characteristics.
Right. Does it have toe pads? How long are the legs? What does the tympanum, the eardrum, look like?
And relying just on that is tricky.
It is, because with frogs, convergent evolution is rampant.
Meaning different lineages evolve to look exactly the same because they are solving the same environmental problems.
Precisely. If you live in leaf litter and you hop around the forest floor, you tend to evolve a certain body shape.
So you had hundreds of species lumped into Eleutherodactylus just because they looked roughly similar.
Yeah, it became this massive, unmanageable genus containing hundreds of species that weren't necessarily closely related at all. It was a taxonomic nightmare.
So our frog, bilineatus, sat in that junk drawer for decades.
Yep.
But looking at the records, it didn't just stay quietly in that drawer. It got moved around.
It was shuffled a lot.
Yeah, so I was moved to Ishnaknama, and then some papers suggested it actually belonged in Hyrus.
Yeah.
Feels like scientists were just blindly shuffling cards.
Well, they were trying to find the signal in the noise. The move to Ishnaknama, for instance, was a genuine attempt to break up that giant wastebasket genus.
But it didn't quite work for this frog.
No. Even in Ishnaknama, bilineatus was the odd one out. It didn't quite fit the diagnosis.
Right.
It was like trying to force a puzzle piece into a spot that was slightly the wrong shape. You can make it fit if you push really hard, but it's clearly not right.
And the right fit only came when we stopped looking at the shape of the puzzle piece and started looking at the picture printed on it.
The DNA.
Exactly, the DNA.
That's the absolute game changer. Molecular phylogenetics. Which brings us to the major turning point in 2021.
The study by Dubois, Oler, and Pyron.
Yes. They didn't just look at the frog's physical shape, they sequenced the genes. And when you look at the molecular data, the picture clears up instantly.
And that data showed that bilineatus wasn't an Ishnaknama at all.
Not even close.
It wasn't an Eleutherodactylus. It was something else entirely.
Right. The genetic analysis revealed that bilineatus actually forms a distinct clade within the subfamily Holodeninae.
Holodeninae.
Yeah, which is a really interesting group of frogs. And the genetics specifically showed that bilineatus is a sister group to two other genera.
Nobella and Burricollis.
Exactly. It's related to them, but it's distinct from them.
So it's not just a weird Nobella.
Correct. The genetic distance, what we call the branch length on the evolutionary tree, was significant. It diverged from those other lineages a really long time ago.
So keeping its old name was basically bad science.
It's distinct enough that if you keep calling it Ishnaknama or Nobella, you are actually lying about its evolutionary history. You are obscuring millions of years of independent evolution.
So to accurately reflect biological reality, they had to build a brand new house for it.
He had no choice.
And thus, they created the genus Bahius.
And suddenly, the two-lined robber frog isn't just one of hundreds of lookalikes anymore. It is the sole representative of the entire Bahius lineage.
Which brings us back to that concept we touched on earlier, the monotypic genus.
Right.
I feel like this is a concept that is often overlooked by people outside the field of biology. We tend to just count species.
We do.
Like you might say, oh, this forest has 100 species and that forest over there has 100 species, so they're perfectly equal in value.
But they absolutely aren't.
Why is that?
This comes down to the concept of phylogenetic diversity, or PD. Think of it this way. If you have a genus with 50 species, let's say, a group of tree frogs that radiated recently, and you lose one of those species, you have lost a variation on a theme.
Right. You lost a color pattern or a specific call.
Yes. But the core theme survives. The genetic architecture, the evolutionary history, is still mostly there in the other 49 species.
But if you lose Bahius?
If you lose Bahius, you lose the entire theme. You are pruning a whole deep branch off the tree of life.
Because there is no backup.
None. There is no sister species sitting around that shares 99% of its genome. Once Bahius bilineatus is gone, that entire evolutionary strategy, that unique genetic distinctiveness, just vanishes forever.
So it effectively carries more evolutionary weight than a single species in a highly crowded genus.
Exactly. And conservationists are really starting to prioritize this metric. We call it evolutionary distinctiveness. And Bahius, being a monotypic genus, scores very high on that scale.
Before we move on from its physical traits, though, the sources do mention something interesting about its appearance.
Oh, the variation.
Yeah. Despite being the only species in its genus, it's not just a carbon copy every time. The visual notes in the records show there is quite a bit of pattern and color variation within the species itself.
Yes, which is fascinating. Even though it's genetically isolated as a lineage, it still maintains morphological diversity within its own populations.
Which makes protecting its geography even more critical to preserve all that variation.
Absolutely.
And the name Bahius gives us a huge hint about that geography. It isn't subtle. It's named directly after the state of Bahia in eastern Brazil.
Right. This is an animal of the Atlantic forest.
The Mata Atlantica.
Yes, one of the most biodiverse and yet tragically most threatened biomes on the entire planet.
And the taxonomic records clearly state it is endemic to Bahia.
Meaning it is found nowhere else.
Right. It's not found over in the Amazon. It's not down in the Cerrado. It is totally locked into this specific region of eastern Brazil.
And not just anywhere in Bahia either. The source material specifies its natural environment is lowland moist forest.
So it needs a specific climate.
Very specific. It needs that constant humidity. It needs that specific thermal envelope to survive.
But here is where the story takes a turn that I found really, really compelling.
The cocoa.
Yes. Usually when we talk about endemic species in the Atlantic forest, it's a tragedy. We talk about how they are clinging to the last 2% of untouched primary forest.
Right, the classic fragmentation story.
But Bahius is doing something completely different. The records explicitly say it occurs in cocoa plantations.
This is such a fascinating twist, and it really speaks to the specific type of agriculture historically practiced in Bahia.
Because we aren't talking about clear-cutting the forest to plant rows of corn or soy.
No, not at all. We are talking about the cabruca system.
Cabruca.
Right. It's a traditional agroforestry method that dates back over a century in that region. You see, cocoa trees, Theobroma cacao, are naturally understory plants.
They don't like blazing direct sun.
Exactly. They evolved in the shade of the Amazon basin. So when farmers started planting cocoa in the Atlantic forest, they didn't cut down all the big native canopy trees.
They left the roof on the forest, basically.
They did. They just thinned out the lower understory and planted the cocoa trees underneath that existing native canopy.
So from the air, a cabruca farm looks surprisingly like a normal forest. It has a high canopy, it has vertical structure.
And crucially for our little frog, it has leaf litter.
The microhabitat.
Exactly, because Bahius bilineatus is a ground dweller. If you zoom in on where you actually find them, they live right in the leaf litter.
And in bromeliads, right? The notes mention bromeliads.
Yes, those epiphytic plants that grow on the tree trunks. In a cabruca system, the farmers allow the leaves from the big canopy trees and the cocoa trees to just fall and decompose naturally.
Which creates this deep, humid layer of organic matter on the ground.
Which is basically a buffet and a protective bunker for a small frog. It creates a microclimate that beautifully mimics the original undisturbed forest floor.
Because the humidity stays high from the canopy shade.
Right. The temperature stays stable, and the farmers generally leave those bromeliads alone.
So Bahius is essentially an accidental beneficiary of a specific economic model.
Very much so.
It's not that the frog, adapted to farming in an evolutionary sense. It's that this specific farming method didn't destroy the key things the frog needs to survive.
Exactly. It's what we call an anthropogenic refuge. The frog accepts this habitat alteration because the variables it cares about, shade, humidity, and leaf litter, are still totally within its tolerance range.
If this were a sugarcane plantation,
Gone.
cattle pasture.
Completely gone. But the cabruca system hits that perfect sweet spot.
And this brings us to the so what of the deep dive, the conservation status.
The tricky part.
Yeah. The IUCN Red List categorizes Bahius bilineatus as least concern.
Least concern, which sounds like a totally clean bill of health.
But when you actually read the fine print in the assessment, the data feels really tense, contradictory almost.
How so?
It says least concern, but then immediately notes in the records that it can be threatened by habitat loss.
Ah, yes. This is the classic tension in conservation assessments.
Explain that for us.
Well, least concern is often a statement about current abundance and current distribution. It is not necessarily a guarantee of long-term security. Right now, there are a lot of Bahius frogs hopping around those cocoa farms. The population isn't crashing today. Therefore, by the strict quantitative criteria, they get slapped with least concern.
But that stability is entirely dependent on human economics.
Yeah.
Specifically, the price of cocoa.
That is the hidden variable. The frog's survival is deeply tied to global commodity markets. If the price of cocoa collapses globally, or if a fungal disease wipes out the cocoa trees.
Which has happened before, right? Like with witch's broom disease.
Exactly. If that happens, farmers might be forced to switch crops to survive. They might decide to finally clear that canopy and run cattle instead.
Or just sell the land for urban development.
Exactly. And the moment that land use changes, that least concern status evaporates overnight.
Wow.
This is why some conservationists argue that species dependent on a single type of human land use are inherently vulnerable, regardless of how many individuals there happen to be right now.
It's a very fragile stability. It's basically a house of cards built on chocolate.
It really is. And remember, because it's a monotypic genus, if that house of cards falls, we lose the whole lineage.
Right. There is no reservoir population in a pristine national park somewhere.
For a huge chunk of this population, the habitat is the plantation.
It really challenges the way we interpret those red list categories. We see least concern, and we mentally check out.
We do.
You think, okay, saved, done, let's worry about the next species. But for a creature like Bahius, least concern is really more like safe for now.
Safe as long as we keep buying chocolate. It highlights the desperate need for what we call reconciling production and conservation.
Meaning we can't just rely on fenced-off national parks.
Exactly. We have to acknowledge that these agroforestry systems are currently serving as lifeboats for millions of years of evolutionary history. Conserving Bahius might look less like buying up raw land and more like actively supporting sustainable, shade-grown cocoa certification.
That's a really powerful reframing. You buy the right chocolate, you keep the canopy intact, you save the frog.
In theory, yes. It connects you, the consumer, directly to the leaf litter in Bahia.
I want to circle back to the taxonomy for a moment because there's another layer here I don't want to miss.
Sure.
We talk about how this frog was basically hidden in Eleutherodactylus for decades. Do you think Bahius is an outlier, or is this happening all over the neotropics right now?
Oh, it is absolutely the norm. It is not an exception at all.
Really?
We are currently in a golden age of biological discovery, but it's not happening the way people think. It's not happening with pith helmets and machetes out in the jungle.
It's happening in a lab.
Exactly. We are sequencing these supposedly common species and realizing they're actually complexes of 3, 4, or even 10 completely different species.
Cryptic diversity.
Cryptic diversity is massive. I would bet serious money that within the collections of natural history museums right now, sitting in jars of alcohol labeled Eleutherodactylus or prismantis, there are dozens of entirely unnamed genera just waiting for someone to finally run the DNA.
Which means our current estimates of global biodiversity are likely significant undercounts.
Drastic undercounts. And the scary part is, we might actually be losing these hidden species before we ever even name them.
Because we don't know what we have.
Think about it. If Bahius had gone extinct in, say, 1990 due to land clearing, we would have just thought we lost a local population of a very common frog. We wouldn't have ever known we lost a completely unique genus.
That's the haunting part of all this. You really can't mourn what you don't know you have.
Which is why this taxonomic work, which I know can seem so dry and academic to people, is actually vital frontline conservation work. You have to define the units of life before you can even attempt to save them.
You need the map.
Right. The work Dubois, Oler, and Pyron did in 2021 gave us that map. Now we know Bahius is a treasure. Before that, it was just misfiled data.
So let's bring this all together for everyone. We have a small frog endemic to the Atlantic forest of Bahia, Brazil. It spent roughly 40 years in the Witness Protection Program of Scientific Naming, disguised as just another generic robber frog.
It survived the massive deforestation of its home by quietly moving into the downstairs apartment of the cocoa industry.
And finally, in 2021, thanks to genetic testing, we realized it wasn't just another frog. It was the sole survivor of a unique evolutionary branch, the first and currently only member of the genus Bahius.
A lineage that hangs by a thread, or rather, hangs by a cocoa pod.
It really makes you look at a map of Brazil differently. It's not just green blobs of forest and gray cities. It's a patchwork of these deep, ancient lineages trying to navigate the modern, human-altered world.
And it reminds us that the word common is actually a very dangerous word in biology. Just because you see a lot of something doesn't mean you truly understand what it is.
So for everyone listening, I want to leave you with this thought. The next time you hear about a new species discovery, don't just picture a scientist stumbling through an uncharted jungle. Picture a geneticist staring at a computer screen, realizing that the common frog in the jar is actually a king without a kingdom, or, an emperor without subjects. If we look closely at a simple cocoa farm, we might see just agriculture, but biology sees the sole survivor of a unique evolutionary branch. What other monotypic wonders are out there, hiding in plain sight in our farms and backyards, just waiting for a name change?
Long live Bahius.
Long live Bahius. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure to be here.
We'll see you on the next one.